What up, dudes and dudettes? Welcome to the Unsolicited podcast or whatever. We're hopping on the time machine and heading back to old 1994. It was an explosive year with even more explosive movies. Set the scene, we had a total ice skater beef between Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan. Grunge legend Kurt Cobain swallowed the business end of a shotgun. That was like R.I.P., bro. Tricky Dick Nixon kicked the bucket. And the sitcom Friends debuted on NBC. Tell you what, man, that Rachel is hot, hot, hot. Name's DJ Z Dizzle, but you can call me Zack. Joining me, of course, is the most bodacious of bros, Martin Cooke. Call him what you want, as long as you don't call him late for happy hour. We like to have fun here on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. So what's going on there, Martin?
Hey, what's up, Zach? All right. So yeah, today, if you couldn't guess already, we're going all the way back and we're looking at the movie 1994, the year 1994 in film. So taking a look at some of the biggest years. Some years stand out more than others in terms of their impact on the world of film and the impact on culture in general. And 1994 is definitely one of those years.
Definitely. But before we actually get into the meat of the episode, got our weekly box office review.
We do indeed. So this past weekend, Thunderbolts debuted, and it debuted to a pretty good haul at the box office, 74.3 million for the weekend, and it's now over 173 million worldwide. Now that's, it's in its first week, and that's about what its budget was. It's about $180 million budget. So it's doing pretty well. It's been reviewed fairly well, so one of the better Marvel outputs in recent years.
Do we know if that budget was before marketing?
They almost never are. So yeah, usually it'll take a little bit, a lot more than that to actually get their full budget back.
And of course, it's not actually called Thunderbolts anymore.
Well, it is and it isn't. I think they're just
Yeah.
playing around with marketing. And yeah, that's what the asterisk was the whole time. I don't know if you actually saw this thing on the weekend, Zach. I happened to go watch it.
No.
And there are some posters out there now calling it the New Avengers. And that's sort of something that happens near the end where it's setting up some stuff in the future. But we don't need to get into that too much. But it's, Thunderbolts or the New Avengers, depending on whatever you want to call them. But coming in second place, still doing great business, it was Sinners at 33.1 million for the weekend. It's now over 244 million worldwide.
Wow.
And that was on a $90 million budget. So it's been a great hit for Ryan Coogler, and just great to see an original idea actually doing well at the box office. Maybe convince some of the studios that they can invest in original ideas and not have to worry about it.
I know Case Surprise, and that's still not that big of a drop off from last week either.
No.
It's dropping off, but
like 30%. Yeah, it's still not nearly what you expect for most drop offs week to week. So yeah, word of mouth is obviously carrying this movie.
Mm-hmm.
In third place, still raking in the big bucks. Not so much original IP as a Minecraft movie. It made an additional 13.7 on the weekend, and it's now up over 876 million worldwide. So by far the biggest movie of the year so far. Fourth place was The Accountant 2, 9.5 million. And fifth place was Until Dawn, 3.8 million. What do we got coming up now?
All right. So we got Juliet and Romeo. Very progressive title. It's a musical based on the quote unquote true story that inspired the play.
Sure it is. Yeah, let's go with that.
Then we got Clown in the Cornfield, another fucking clown horror movie, but it does have an 88 on Rotten Tomatoes, so who knows?
Yeah, you never know.
I probably won't be actually stepping out to see it. I'll probably wait till Halloween season to check that out, but do what you will. And then we have Fight or Flight, a Josh Hartnett-led thriller that takes place on a plane. Seems like another tired trope that I've seen half a dozen times at least with the Liam
Yeah.
Neeson movie and the Cillian Murphy, Rachel McAdams movie and Snakes on a Plane.
And in recent years, yeah, there was recently a Mark Wahlberg one that I didn't
Oh
even
yeah,
see, but
yeah,
I've heard
directed
was
by
possibly one of the worst movies of all time. So
yeah, that was directed by Mel Gibson actually.
yeah. So yeah, a lot of bad action movies set on planes, unfortunately.
Yeah. But then we have Shadow Force, which is Kerry Washington and Omar Sy, and they are two ex-spies on the run from their former employer. It seems like I've seen this one a dozen times as well, except the leads are black. And then last, and the one that I will go out and see, as I'm sure you
Yes,
will, Martin, is
absolutely.
Friendship.
Woohoo.
It's the A24 comedy starring Paul Rudd and Tim Robinson. I'm
Yeah.
sure Tim Robinson is a hero of the show here. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't wait to see this one. Yeah, the rest of them do not interest me at all, but Friendship I will definitely be seeing opening weekend. All right, and then before just one more thing before we get into the movies of 1994, a little bit of film industry news. On the weekend, in a social media post, President Trump announced that he would be imposing 100% tariff on films, quote, produced in foreign lands. So, uh, there's a lot of questions about this and way more questions than answers at this point. We don't know exactly how, nobody really knows exactly how this would work. You know, as a lot of people know, just kind of like the car industry, films these days are made in a whole bunch of different places. That's why at the very end of credits, if you ever stayed at the end of credits, you've got government film organizations from all over the world because maybe a bit of the CGI will be made in one place, maybe it'll be filmed in one place, maybe it'll be edited somewhere else. And
yeah,
so
you have like
how
Toronto and
exactly,
Dublin and
yeah,
Atlanta and yeah,
New
it's all
Zealand and
yeah.
yeah. So how exactly tariffs would work on some of this stuff, which is actually more of a service, and it's not like there's products going through customs. It's all a big question mark, but it's just something we're going to have to pay attention to in the industry going forward.
Yeah, and this isn't unsolicited economics reviews, but yeah, Trump even went out of his way earlier today to say that like the James Bond franchise would be safe for whatever reason. Guy likes to
Just
shoot from the hip,
despite the
but
fact that it's British. All right.
and yeah, he called out Sean Connery and said he was a good guy. So it was weird times we live in. He's like, yeah, yeah. He's like, yeah, he said Sean Connery was the reason that Trump was able to get his golf course built in Aberdeen. He's
Okay.
like, let the man build his fucking golf course. So whatever. Anyway,
All right.
let's dive into the meat of this podcast, shall we?
Yeah, so let's go all the way back to 1994 if Zach's impression at the beginning didn't already get you in the right headspace. So, what's going on in the world in 1994? We got big momentous events on the world stage, and the events in Africa, for instance, show both the good and bad of that. On the one hand, we've got Nelson Mandela elected as president of South Africa in the country's first multiracial elections ever. But then a little bit farther north, unfortunately, we've got the Rwandan genocide, the good and the bad, the uplifting and the horrible. We've got a tiny little company that became an empire named Amazon is founded by a guy who nobody's ever heard of named Jeff Bezos.
Wait, who?
Yeah, exactly. The Sony PlayStation was released and became a fantastic source of entertainment and time wasting for many people over the next few decades. North America, a lot of North America watched the slowest car chase in history on their televisions as OJ Simpson sat in the back of a white Ford Bronco being driven around the freeways of LA while chased very slowly and carefully by police. And in the world of sports, Brazil wins the World Cup over Italy. And there is no World Series for the first time in 90 years because of a work stoppage. In the Academy Awards held that year, they were hosted by Whoopi Goldberg, and Schindler's List dominates the night, winning 7 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director. But what we're interested in this podcast are the movies that were actually released in 1994 because it was a big one. And I think one way you can determine how the movies of a certain year resonate with the general public is to take a look actually at how many people tune in for the Oscars that recognize those movies. So the
Good
Oscars
point.
the
Yeah.
next year in 1995 had the second best TV viewing ratings of the entire 90s, behind only the 1998 Academy Awards, where Titanic, won everything and was a juggernaut, and obviously the most watched movie in history up to that point. So, very big year in movies. So let's kick it off. We're gonna go for the most part a bit chronologically on some of the big ones, and then we'll note just a bunch of the other ones. So the first one we're gonna mention is Speed. Now, Speed was directed by Jan de Bont, written by Graham Yost, stars obviously Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, Dennis Hopper, Jeff Daniels. It was released on June 10th, so really kind of the beginning of the summer season. It became the fifth highest grossing movie of that year. It made 121 million domestically and 350 million worldwide on only a $30 million budget. So massive fucking hit. It, somewhat surprisingly, it was nominated for 3 Oscars and actually won 2 of them. But for ones you would expect, it won for Best Sound and Best Sound Effects. Now, it spawned a sequel, obviously, that did not do very well in large part, because Keanu Reeves declined to return, and also was just a terrible movie. Uh, but this is the movie that really made Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stars. Keanu Reeves had been in Bill and Ted's before. Bullock, the year prior, had been in Demolition Man, but neither of them were really like big A-listers, household names. And this movie absolutely did that for both of them. It also led to a whole shitload of copycat type movies. And I think you would have to say it's one of the quintessential action movies of all time. And, obviously cultural relevance. There's still lots of familiar things today, quotes like pop quiz, hot shot, stuff like that. So it's definitely one we needed to talk about. Any thoughts on
Absolutely.
Speed, Zach?
No, no thoughts. No.
No notes, carry on.
But to your point, Speed was actually a copycat in itself because it was basically pitched as Die Hard on a
It
Bus.
was, yeah.
But it definitely sets itself apart because you don't see it as that. I can see in a pitch room where you would want to make that point because Die Hard was a massive hit and
Yeah.
a huge franchise. But yeah, this was one of the first R-rated movies I was allowed to watch because there was no nudity and the violence wasn't really that over the
It
top.
was R-rated? I'm
Yeah, it was.
surprised at that.
And
Holy.
I think it was only because they dropped the F-bomb like 3 or 4 times.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, very tame by today's
Yeah,
standards, to say the
absolutely.
least.
Yeah.
And it also turned out to be one of my favorite action movies of the 90s because, like, from the opening credits to the very end, it was just so kinetic. It had
Yeah.
all the devices you want, everything is just go, go, go. There's a ticking clock, there's the bomb on the bus. If it goes above 50, it arms. If it goes below 50. A lot of this is like so contrived, but
Yeah.
I mean, you don't care because you just get lost in how cool the movie is.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
physics don't need to matter. You can launch
oh, the
buses
jumping,
off of
yes, yes, absolutely.
it's just all good summer blockbuster fun.
And I thought the score was really good, very catchy. It's been in my head for the past. I watched this again about 4 days ago. It's been in my head
Right.
ever since, like the dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
It's just, again, just very driving,
Yeah.
very like adrenaline pumping. Like you are on the edge of the seat, edge of your seat for this entire film. Um, I thought Dennis Hopper was a phenomenal villain. He basically made the movie because Keanu Reeves as an actor is just such an enigma because he's had
He's kind
such
of a blank slate. Yeah.
he's had such an interesting career, and I might want to do like a career retro on him at one point because
That'd be
how
interesting.
did he become one of the biggest actors of the past 30 years with no charisma?
Well, yeah, I guess some people might think he has charisma, but yeah, it is very interesting. Yeah, maybe when Ballerina comes out later this summer, we can take a look at Keanu Reeves' career.
But yeah, he is just like the not the everyman, but yeah, okay. Don't want to get too deep into that.
Yeah,
But
no, but you're right. Dennis Hopper absolutely leveled up this movie in a way. Because if it had just been some standard villain, but Dennis Hopper is always just kind of a little weird and different, and so him in this role just made it, yeah, absolutely perfect.
And I love Jeff Daniels in this movie.
Yeah,
He actually did some pretty convincing acting, and I think he kind of grounded that partnership between him and Keanu, gave Keanu something to go against.
yeah, and totally different role than one that he's in that we'll talk about at the end here
And again,
later on in the year.
it's a perfectly structured film too, because the first bus explodes with the guy getting the coffee right around the 28-minute mark. Then the payphone rings. There's a bomb on a bus, and that all happens right around the 30-minute mark. Which, if you study film in any way, you know that's like when shit needs to get going. Like you have the inciting
Yeah,
incident, and then, but even then, we know the villain within like 5 minutes of the movie, and I forgot that only the second act takes place on the bus, because the first act is basically,
yeah,
the first hostage incident on the
the
elevator.
elevator. Yeah,
The entire second act takes place on the bus, and then there's a whole third act where he kidnapped Dennis Hopper kidnaps Sandra Bullock, and that whole thing, like the bus explodes way earlier than I remember.
yeah, yeah. It really does. It's yeah, you sort of think of it that it all takes place on. I mean, obviously, a big chunk of the movie does take place on the bus, but you're right. It's almost it's very well it's very tightly constructed
Sure.
as an action film.
As I was watching this, I also wondered who says Jack more in a movie, Sandra Bullock in this or Kate Winslet in Titanic.
Yeah, I don't know. Although Dennis Hopper also gives Sandra Bullock a run her money.
Oh,
He
true,
says
true.
Jack a lot too. Jack is probably the most used word in this movie.
Uh, Sandra Bullock was my first movie star crush.
Ah, there we go.
Before that, it was all Kim the Pink Ranger from Power Rangers, and Jasmine from the cartoon version of Aladdin. I was like seven though, And I don't know if this is the first film to use it, but I noticed this because we talked because it was in Zorro as well. But the roar of a cougar um, sound effect was added to explosions in both these films
Mm,
to make it like bigger and more epic. And when I hear both of those, like when the main bus blows up, you can hear like
right.
it's like super obvious if you're looking for it, but if you're not, it does enhance the effect of it.
Yeah. Speaking of
So next,
jungle cats.
oh yeah, well, great unintentional segue. So next up we have The Lion King. It came out in June of '94, and like Zorro from last week, wow, can't believe I did that completely unintentionally. It's another one of my top favorite movies of all time. And that said, I will try to restrain myself while discussing it, because eventually I'd like to do an entire episode on the Disney Renaissance of the late 80s through the mid 90s. I think that'd be a worthy topic.
Yeah.
And as I'm sure most of you know, this is one of the most iconic Disney films of all time. It was a massive juggernaut success. Hans Zimmer won an Oscar for the score, and Elton John got one step closer to an EGOT for the song Can You Feel the Love Tonight? And what a great musical duo. You have Hans Zimmer writing the score, Elton John writing the songs. It's like, oh, like, how could you go wrong there? And across its initial run and various re-releases, I'm probably responsible for about 100 million of this. No, but it's grossed nearly $980 million on a $45 million budget. And to make a large scale Disney film for $45 million, even with inflation, is pretty impressive.
Yeah. Biggest movie of the year in
Mhm.
1994.
So the all-star cast is a who's who of 90s stars. Yeah, the guy my sisters were all into, and Jonathan Taylor Thomas back in the day, of course, of Home Improvement fame. You got Matthew Broderick, James Earl Jones, Jeremy Irons, Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, Nathan Lane. The list goes on and on. But it's beautifully animated, as I already said, fantastic music, and introduced kids to the plot of Hamlet in a roundabout way. And while Hamlet is Shakespeare's longest play that clocks in around 4 hours, this is a brisk hour and a half or so.
Yeah, much better way to get into Hamlet. Yeah, this as you say, there's so many iconic things about this movie, and the music is first and foremost. I mean, you can just imagine you just hear the opening notes, right? They la, 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 and Pride Rock and everything, and it just conjures up so much imagery in your mind just by hearing those first few notes, and then all the songs, the Hakuna Matatas, everything else. The music really made this such a massive hit. And you mentioned all the people in the voices. You couldn't find a better person to play a kind of powerful, stately king
Mm.
than James Earl Jones. Like what they couldn't have found a better voice for that. And I don't obviously the movie still would have done pretty well, but would it have been as iconic with anybody else in that role? I don't know. His voice is just so incredible and so unique. There was never anybody like James Earl Jones in terms of his voice.
And the contrast between him and Jeremy Irons was just
Yes.
goosebump inducing.
Yeah, and Jeremy Irons also a fantastic actor and could really play sinister and yet conniving and smart at the same time and like a just his voice. And yeah, really great stuff by him as well. Yeah. It
Yeah.
is it was as you said, it was sort of we don't need to get into it too much, but it was almost the culmination of about 5 years of Disney animated feature renewal that kind of started with The Little Mermaid and then where they kept getting more and more successful and bigger productions, bigger and bigger cultural relevance. And then
Mm-hmm.
this was almost the pinnacle of it. I mean, as we said, it was the number one movie at the box office the entire year, which is these days makes sense for a family animated film. That was pretty much unheard of
Yeah,
back
for
in the
sure.
early 90s. Like that really hadn't happened in what, maybe since Snow White and 37. Like there hadn't been an animated family film like that was this big of a deal. So it really also changed the industry in a way in terms of the way that people went to see animated movies.
Yeah, and this is one of the first movies I remember actually going to and like remembering everything afterward. And yeah, went with my mom and dad to the Edwards Theater in Valencia, California, and it's still like one of my core memories
Wow,
of movie going. So yeah, always hold a super special place in my heart.
that's really cool. All right, the next movie we've got is Forrest Gump. And this was directed by Robert Zemeckis, written by Eric Roth, based upon a book by Winston Groom. It stars Tom Hanks, Robin Wright, Gary Sinise, Sally Field. It was released on July 6th. So now we're really kind of into the middle of summer. It was the second highest grossing movie of that year. So if it hadn't been for The Lion King, this would have been the biggest movie of the year. It was a massive hit as well, both commercially and obviously with critics. It was nominated for 13 Oscars and won six, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Tom Hanks. And this also just had a massive cultural impact, including, spawning a chain of restaurants from the movie, which is pretty incredible. I think
I
we
went
should
to the
also.
one. I went to the one in Times Square at one point, and it is massively overrated and massively overpriced. So
Yeah. I've only been to I think two or maybe one, and yeah, they're not my thing. They're not great, but I'm not a shrimp guy anyway.
I do have the souvenir cup though. So
Ah, there you go. There you go. Uh, and just like in The Lion King, the music in this was hugely important. So the soundtrack was also a massive hit of incredibly recognizable hits from the 50s to the 80s. It actually reached number two on Billboard's album chart. It sold 12 million copies and at the time was one of the best selling albums of any sort of all time. It Forrest Gump is a movie that garners a lot of hate from film snobs and people, and I can understand some of the criticism. I have to say I appreciated Forrest Gump more as a film once I came to the realization, and maybe this is a little crazy out there thinking, but I came to the realization that Forrest Gump isn't actually the main character, that the main character of the film is America in the second half of the 20th century. And
white America.
Yes, yes, definitely white America in the second half of the 20th century, but kind of like kind of a loss of innocence
Sure.
for America and how it was dealing with those changes, and then kind of an open-ended question of whether or not America was going to lose its soul or stay. And that was that's sort of the thesis. Obviously, it came down on the very positive side because it's at its heart, it's sort of a sappy movie. If you don't have that stuff, then yes, it's just kind of a movie filled with emotional manipulation. But it's still an absolutely iconic movie in the history of film.
Yeah, I've gone through different phases of my life, and I've also okay, when I was a kid, I really liked this movie. When I was kind of going through my like rebellious teen phase, I hated this movie,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I've come back around to appreciating it. I haven't viewed it quite like you just stated, but that's a really good way to interpret the entire message of this film, where Forrest isn't really the main character. He's kind of the conduit from which we view these events.
yeah. Because he's kind of he's the cipher. Like he as a main character, he doesn't really change, right? He's one of these things where it's everything that's changing around him, and
Interesting. Yeah,
there are movies like that, right, where the main character is the constant. But I think what's more interesting than him as this constant is yeah, all the cultural and societal changes in America.
yeah, that totally feeds into your point because he really doesn't have an arc,
No, he doesn't. Yeah,
but America does.
absolutely.
So yeah, that okay, very, very good point. I've never heard it articulated like that before, but very well done, Martin.
Okay.
Anyway, so so okay, let's get to Jenny
Yes.
because he is probably one of the most polarizing characters in film history.
Yeah.
So okay, Jenny on first watch is like the worst person,
Yeah.
but if you as you mature and you start looking at it from her perspective, she's not a heartless bitch. She's just a tragic victim with ambition who doesn't want to settle for a mentally disabled dude.
Well, and also somebody who's, as you say, tragic victim. She's somebody who's clearly traumatized
Of
by
course.
abuse that she suffered as a kid. And, a lot of times you see that abuse manifests itself in an inability to trust and to get close to people. And I
100%.
think you see that anytime, her and Forrest get close, she runs away. And that actually totally tracks with the
Yeah.
behavior of somebody who would have been abused as a child like that.
Yeah, if anything, her character was ahead of her time.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I've come to think that a little bit too, where you're right. At the beginning, I mean, because yeah, at first glance, she just seems like a horrible person. But you're right. No, I think she's, yeah, as you say, much more of a victim.
And I totally forgot that Haley Joel Osment was in this movie.
I had totally forgotten that too until I rewatched it. And then I was like, oh shit, the little kid's about to see dead people soon.
Yeah, talk about trauma there, the generational
Yeah.
trauma. One moment that like really stood out to me and actually made me emotional, which I've never been about this film, is the moment where Forrest comes in and he asks Jenny when he sees his son, he's like, "Is he like me?"
Yeah.
And when he finds out that his son isn't mentally challenged, Forrest kind of shrugs it off, but the tears in his eyes made us all know that he's known all along how he's been made fun of his entire life. Like
Yeah.
he's kind of just powered through it and done his own thing, but he isn't as stupid as he's let on, I guess.
Yeah. And it's moments like that. I mean, Tom Hanks won his second Oscar for this after having won for Philadelphia the year before. And it's moments like this where it's that kind of thing that does elevate his performance. I mean, this
Hmm.
really could have been kind of just uh, almost like a caricature of
Oh, of
somebody
course.
of low intelligence. And in many ways, I think some people might see that, but I think there are a number of scenes like that where Tom Hanks imbues it with sort of a sense of of nuance that changes his performance well beyond caricature.
Yeah, and Robert Downey Jr.'s character in Tropic Thunder brings this up really well. And he's like, and
Mm,
forgive me, but I'm quoting. He says, "You never want to go full retard."
yeah,
And
yeah.
Tom Hanks, stupid as fuck, but motherfucker's great at ping pong. Yeah.
Hell of a football player too.
Sorry to use the R word, but it does illustrate how like you have to give it some nuance, or
Yeah,
otherwise it could be a caricature. So yeah.
yeah.
And with that, I think it's time for a drink.
I believe so. Yeah, let's do it. So, what are we going to sip on tonight, Zach?
All right. Well, we're gonna be doing some gin and juice. Now, I got me some Seagram's gin. Everybody got that cuss, but they ain't chipped in. Now, this type of shit happens all the time. You got to get yours before I got to get mine. Everything is fine. And sorry, that's the best you're going to get because we have to wait 30 days to clear any musical cues. Otherwise, we would have
Yeah,
played the
sadly, we
sound.
won't be playing any of it. But
And
it is a song that was released as a single in 1994. So that's why uh, Snoop, by the way, just in case anybody's wondering. Uh, for me, any Gen Zers who are watching this who don't know Snoop and Gin and Juice,
who went by Snoop Doggy Dogg at the time.
he didn't need. Yeah. He
All
was
right.
not America's father or grandfather
No, he
or
wasn't doing
whatever he is now.
he wasn't doing stuff with Martha Stewart.
No.
Okay, we have a special cameo by Lance and Vinny on the bed there.
Arr, some doggos on the pod. Love it.
And this is one of
For those just listening on Spotify and not watching on YouTube, Zach's got two golden retrievers sitting on his bed
no,
back
no,
there.
no, no.
Oh,
Vinny's
sorry, golden labs.
no, this one's a rat
What?
terrier.
Oh, is he?
A rat
Oh,
terrier mix. Vinny, get up. You're a mutt,
oh,
aren't you?
is he a dude? Okay, so
Oh,
one
you're
retriever and one. Okay,
so sleepy.
yeah, they're both very sleepy. Anyway,
So
we're
yeah, this is
we're,
gonna be
we're very pro dog on this podcast. So
okay. Very simple ingredient. Just need a cup of some ice. Uh, I'm not even measuring this because they don't do that shit in the hood. You just pour as much as you want. And so put the gin in. I just got some simply orange juice, and in Long Beach in '94 they're probably using Tropicana or and yeah,
and I'm cutting my orange juice with a little simply lemonade, so I'm doing half lemonade, half orange.
and I put a little lime wedge on mine just to class the joint up. All right. Yeah,
All
don't
right,
get
we'll be
much
doing
more
this if
simple
I
than
can
that.
get this stupid freshness cap off.
Oh, those freshness caps, they always fuck you.
All righty.
All right,
Sipping
yeah,
on
and
gin
that
and
is
juice. Here we go.
laid back with my mind on my money and my money on my mind. Classic.
Yep. Great stuff.
So
What's up
let's get back
next?
into the films. All right, we
Yes.
got True Lies next. It came out in July of '94. Action comedy written and directed by old James Cameron, starring the man of the day, Arnold. Though after this, Arnold's star began to wane a bit. Joining the cast is Jamie Lee Curtis, Tom Arnold, and a weird minor role for Charlton Heston with an eye patch. I think he's in two or three scenes. It was really jarring.
And Tia
Uh,
Carrera, who was
oh yeah.
huge in those days.
hmm As per usual, when Cameron and Schwarzenegger team up, it was a huge hit. While it was the first film to ever cost $100 million, it wound up grossing almost 400 million, and it was the third highest grossing movie of the year, behind, of course, Lion King and Forrest Gump. Jamie Lee snagged a Golden Globe for her performance as Best Actress in a Musical or Comedy. Still don't know why that's a category.
It's such a confusing category. Every year it doesn't make any sense.
And this movie, I was surprised to learn recently, was not without controversy. A 2004 Paris court ruled that True Lies and the movie it was based on, La Totale, were both plagiarized from a 1981 script called Emile.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so thoughts on True Lies?
This is, I mean, I mentioned that Speed is kind of a quintessential action movie. This is another one that kind of falls into that category. And this is James Cameron just kind of flexing his muscles to try a different kind of genre after, he had done Aliens and then he had done Terminator. So he had kind of done somewhat, although Aliens wasn't quite as much of a horror, but he had done kind of sci-fi movies and then he wanted to do sort of kind of straight up spy thriller, and that's what this is. And he knocked it out of the park. This is
Mm.
just incredibly entertaining. Jamie Lee Curtis, although these days, uh, at my current advanced age, she doesn't seem that old at all. But at the time when the movie came out, she obviously has this scene where she's trying to be seductive to a person that she doesn't realize is actually Arnold. And at the time, she was seen as like an older actress doing this, but it was almost a demonstration. Hey, older actresses can be sexy and alluring and everything too, because, damn, she was. And but this also was just an incredibly funny movie. It was the first time I think anybody had really seen a Harrier jet in action, which was really cool and
Yeah,
something
fuck
we had
yeah.
never seen before. It was just, yeah, start to finish, high budget. I mean, you mentioned it was $100 million, but it all comes across on the screen. Like it
Hmm.
just seems like we're in for this spectacular ride. And that's clearly what moviegoers in 1994 thought as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because a lot of movies go over budget because of just fuck ups from the studio or the director or the crew or something. But anytime James Cameron hits a new benchmark, whether it's Titanic or even Avatar, you can tell that every dollar he spends is on the screen. So,
Yeah.
yeah, very good point.
Yeah, and this happens to him almost every film where the budget starts going up, and then there's all these news stories about it, and people are worried. Oh man, this is going to be a disaster. This is going to be whatever, and then he ends up making more money than he knows what to do with. This happens every single
Yeah,
time he
basically, yeah.
makes a movie, basically, and this was just another one of those. Uh, yeah, I mean, he's got the Harrier jets. He's blowing up bridges. It's just all sorts of great fun action. And then, as I said, just lots of really funny moments. Tom Arnold was probably never more famous than he was at this
Hmm.
point
For
in
sure.
this movie. Same with Tia Carrere, who had been in Wayne's World, but this was really her kind of leveling up as well. And as you say, this may have been the peak of Arnold's career before he started to decline in popularity a little bit.
Yeah, Tom Arnold kind of horn dogging over 14-year-old Eliza Dushku was a little yeesh. But
That moment, oof, yeah, that's not great. Um,
that anyway, 30 years ago, we gotta, take it's not sign of the times or
yeah,
whatever. But
still, I wonder
yeah.
how much of that was written and how much of that was just Tom Arnold. I
Oh
don't
God.
know.
Okay, this is got to get really dark. Let's not. Okay. One thing that always makes me laugh is that in Arnold's movies, he's always given names like Harry or John or like in Total Recall Douglas. It's just so
But
weird.
then he still has this like outrageous accent
Yeah.
because he just can't get rid of it. Yeah.
And it's interesting, the Arabic tech guy that's on Arnold's team and the main villain, Art Malik. The only time I've seen either of those guys in another film is the tech guy in Scorpion King as The Rock's sidekick, and
Oh,
Art
that's
Malik
right.
as the main villain in A Kid in King Arthur's Court, the Disney movie that came out in probably around this time. I don't know. I'd have to look it up, but yeah, both staples of my early movie going years anyway. I love how the action in this movie just gets ramped up
Yeah.
from start to finish because one of the main set pieces during the first act was a horse chasing a motorcycle. And then, as you already illustrated, we have the
But then
Harrier
he takes
jet.
the horse in the elevator. Like, it's just great stuff.
No, that was a brilliant writing choice because
Hmm.
it could have been a motorcycle on motorcycle chase and it would have still been cool, but it wouldn't have had the humor, and
Yeah,
that's what sets True Lies apart is that it's
exactly.
it's, it's as funny as it is action packed. And Arnold just like wiping people out as he goes through the mall, or the hotel. He's like, sorry. Excuse me, sorry. Excuse me. Just great early '90s action comedy, and the one that I cracked up though because I realized that I have never seen this movie all the way through in its original version.
Oh, really?
It's
Okay.
on cable. It's on cable so
It
much,
is too.
and
It's always on TV.
I'll catch like bits and pieces of it, but I've never actually sat down and watched it beginning to end in its original another R-rated movie, by the way, and it seems
Yeah.
pretty tame compared to today. Anyway, okay, so funniest moment for me was the dead limo driver on the bridge and how the car managed to stay straight through the entire Jamie Lee Curtis Tia Carrera fight in the back seat. I was
Every
cracking
once in a
up.
while, it bumps the guardrails, I
Yeah,
guess. But
yeah, it's like bumper bowling where it kind of
they're doing their job.
yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Shout out to the bridge builders, the guys who put those guardrails on.
yeah. I was dying when actually yeah. Last night I was watching that. I was dying.
Yeah, and I love the whole scene where he's given truth serum. Like that's kind of a tired trope
Oh
at this
yeah,
point, but it was still fresh enough in 1994 that it was really funny. Uh, yeah, it's just a fully entertaining movie.
hmm. Oh yeah. One last note.
Yeah.
I just wish Jim Cameron would get back to doing stuff like this instead of just
Yes.
spending all of his Twilight years in Pandora doing Avatar movies. Like, I just feel like he's wasting his talent in trying to be just more technologically innovative instead of
Well, I think that's it.
actually
I
writing.
think at this point in his he's just much more interested in technology than he actually is in storytelling in movies.
Yeah,
And so he's just trying to find technological edges. That's clearly what interests him at this point.
makes me sad.
Yeah. Next up, we've got a totally different kind of movie. And we're now out of the summer movie season in 1994. And this is The Shawshank Redemption. It was directed by Frank Darabont, written by Darabont, based on a short story by Stephen King. It stars Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman, and it was released in October on October 14th of that year. Now, this was not a big hit upon its release. And, a lot of questions as to why. Some people think, even the title, Shawshank Redemption, people are like, what the fuck's that? I'm not going to go see that. In fact, it was the 95th highest grossing movie of the year.
I didn't know
So,
it was that. Wow,
yeah,
that okay,
just
wow.
not a hit at all. But by 1995, so by the next year, it became the top video rental of 1995. Think about that. 95th highest grossing movie at the box office to top video rental. That's just incredible.
And that's
And
where so much of the profit was back then was in video rental
yeah,
for every movie, but to be the top rented movie was to make the most money by a long shot, which is obviously a dead medium now. But yeah, that's
yeah, and this is also about the time when the movie industry was really starting to change in that way. That studios were starting to see the major possibilities of the video rental market and how even though a movie wasn't necessarily going to be successful in the theater, they could still make money off of it. You think of lots of movies that became cult classics, things like Showgirls and stuff like that, that only did so and didn't do that well in the theater, but actually made tons of money
well, there
because
was a specific reason for that
yeah,
one.
yeah, there's good reason for that one, I suppose. Yeah, not the same reason for Shawshank, but anyway, yeah, let's get back to Shawshank. But just to say that Shawshank was probably one of the movies at the forefront of that sea change in terms of the bottom line for Hollywood. So it was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including for Best Picture, Best Actor for Morgan Freeman, and Best Cinematography for Roger Deakins, one of his many before he finally won, but it didn't win any of them. But it has obviously become one of the most beloved films of all time. It always appears on almost every list of best movies of all time. It's basically been the top rated movie on IMDb since 2008, which is pretty incredible when it overtook The Godfather and has pretty much remained up there ever since. It is just such a beloved movie for a number of reasons. And yeah, so you cannot talk about 1994 movies and overall cultural impact without mentioning The Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, and speaking of this is a what I mentioned on True Lies. Speaking of always being on TV, this one is also not so much anymore. But when I was growing up and especially like in the mid aughts and a little later, yeah, this movie was always on TBS or TNT or one of those networks. And again, until a few years ago, I had never sat down and watched this in its original version. And
Wow. Okay.
this is during the COVID years when I was trying to knock out the AFI Top 100.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I sat down and watched this in its entirety in its original version, and yeah, a lot of the darker stuff gets cut out when it's on cable,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
The prison rapes and
yeah,
stuff like that. Yeah.
but yeah, what a brilliant piece of filmmaking,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so Morgan Freeman was nominated for Best Actor, huh? I didn't know that.
He was, yeah, and watching it again, yeah, because you sort of think that Tim Robbins is the main character, but obviously it's Morgan Freeman who's the one who's doing the voiceover
Uh-huh.
throughout the whole film, and it's kind of him telling the story of Andy, and then the very end of the movie, it's him making the choice to go and see. So thinking about it in that way, yeah, I guess Morgan Freeman is kind of the lead.
Hmm.
It does make sense.
And
I guess
he was
it
cert
is kind of surprising that Robbins didn't get a nomination of any sort, though.
mm. And yeah, Freeman was certainly the most established actor as
Mhm.
well during that period. But yeah, two of the most iconic, not even scenes, just images in film history. One, of course, when the warden and co are looking down the hole that Tim Robbins' character makes, and the second one, of course, being Tim Robbins himself in like the Christ pose
Yeah,
when
yeah,
the
on the
rain's dripped,
poster. Yeah.
yeah, with the rain dripping down on him, and yeah, just so influential. And you've already illustrated this, but yeah, to be on the top of IMDb for as long as it has is just crazy considering 95th or in the gross for that year. That's insane.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was no internet, so if you didn't have word of mouth or like a lot of these films that we cover have catchy titles or like crazy good marketing campaigns or great stars attached to them. And while Morgan Freeman was a star, he couldn't really carry his own movie. So, you have Tom Hanks and Robert Zemeckis, you have, Disney, you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Cameron and the like.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So Frank Darabont, who wasn't, wasn't super well known at that point, and yeah, and Stephen King's some of his things had been turned into movies, mostly horror. So I think
mhm.
that's the other thing. If people think, oh, this is based on Stephen King, maybe they
Yeah,
would have thought it was a horror
that's not
movie.
gonna sell it.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So the last of the six that we're gonna like really deep dive into is, of course, Pulp Fiction.
Ding, ding, ding,
There,
ding,
there,
ding,
there.
ding,
I know.
ding.
I would love to have that cue, but we'd have to wait 30 days for it to come out. The Dick Dale. Yeah. Okay, so came out in October, but premiered at Cannes or Cannes. The pronunciation switches every fucking year, it seems like. Like, no, it's Cannes. No, it's Cannes. Anyway, the Cannes Film Festival in May. It's Quentin Tarantino's second film and widely regarded as his magnum opus. Yeah, it has crime, over the top violence, non-linear storylines, ensemble cast, and witty dialogue. They're all here and very much put to the forefront, and they've all become signatures of a Tarantino film. It stars an essentially back from the dead John Travolta, and this film is one of the most famous things about this film is that Quentin Tarantino brought him back from just exile, basically. And of course, it has Sam Jackson, Bruce Willis, Uma Thurman, Harvey Keitel, Christopher Walken, yada yada yada. I just go down the list. Ving Rhames,
Tim Roth, yeah,
yeah,
everybody. Yeah.
grossed over 200 million on a less than $8 million budget. Another huge, massive success, and it's really the one. It's really the film that catapulted Harvey Weinstein into the stratosphere of movie producers. So,
Yeah.
good news, bad news. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, but QT was the only one to take the statue home that night for his screenplay, which I should definitely mention was also co-written by Roger Avery. So,
Yes, and there
Pulp
was a bit
Fiction,
of there
Martin.
was a bit of a fight, I think, in terms of credit over the screenplay
Yeah, they've
over the
reconciled
years.
since then,
Yeah,
but yeah, it was two young, testosterone filled writers coming up in the game, just fighting over the scraps, and yeah. So
yeah.
anyway, yeah, Pulp Fiction, Martin.
Pulp Fiction, obviously, yeah, obviously an incredible movie. It's hard to say, you know, it's also subjective, but it may still be Tarantino's best film. It it's interesting, last week when we were talking about movies set in Mexico, there were a number of them that were from the early 2000s that had interconnected storylines. And obviously, this wasn't entirely new in 1994. Robert Altman's Shortcuts had been released the year before, but it wasn't a super huge hit. And I think this movie more than anything else, popularized that as a way to make movies for basically the next decade. There were
Mm,
so many movies made after this with interconnected storylines and all that kind of stuff. So massively influential in that way. Influential in terms, again, the use of music. I mean, we already talked about Forrest Gump. This was the other massive soundtrack for that year. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing sound. And unlike Forrest Gump, a lot of the songs in this were songs that weren't as well known. It wasn't just sort
sure.
of rehashing all these super big hits like Forrest Gump did. It was, kind of little known things that just had cool vibes to them. But everybody loved this soundtrack. And I think those two movies, so 1994 is kind of the year of the movie soundtrack and made movie soundtracks a thing that producers started paying attention to.
Yeah.
Again, ancillary benefits in terms of how they could recoup some costs.
Oh yeah, to
And
go like
so,
multi-platinum.
yeah, yeah. And so, yeah, you started to see a lot more interesting soundtracks in the mid and late 90s. So again, yes, super influential in a number of ways. I mean, there's so many movies and movie makers in the late 90s that you would say, oh, that's sort of Tarantino-esque in terms of style, in terms of
Yeah.
some of the dialogue and all of it dates back really to this movie. I mean, to some extent Reservoir Dogs, which came before, but this was really the movie that everybody watched and every, aspiring filmmaker would study.
Yeah, the soundtrack is especially interesting because Weinstein pressured Tarantino to because it was all 70s because Tarantino was just like stuck in the 70s
Yeah.
with I mean aping from Sergio Leone and all the so yeah, okay, the only
Yeah, some
modern
of the
quote
black
unquote.
exploitation films, like, yeah, like he took styles from everybody, but he made it his own somehow.
Yeah. And so it was all 70s music and before 70s. But the only song that he put in that was modern was actually a cover of Girl, You'll Be a Woman
Yes,
Soon. So like it was he appeased Harvey Weinstein, but he was also like, fuck you. I'm gonna keep an old classic in there, but it's
but
gonna
it's
be a
because
cover.
yeah, it's gonna be a cover. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, he was like one of the original punk rock directors and auteurs. So yeah, I mean, what else is there to say about Pulp Fiction? It's 95 on the AFI list right now of all-time movies, and it's yeah, probably still. Well, it's definitely his most defining film, but whether it's
Yeah,
his best,
no,
that's up for it's
yeah,
subjective. But
yeah. It's
for
up for
me,
debate. Yeah.
it's still his best,
Hmm.
just because it encapsulates everything that Tarantino's about.
That's a good point. Good way of putting it. But
All right, so that's it for the six films that were the biggest films of 1994 for sure. But
yeah,
the
but we
man of the
cannot take.
hour.
Yeah, and we're already running late on time. But
Mm.
we cannot talk about movies in 1994 without talking about one person in particular, and that's Jim Carrey. Because Jim Carrey had three movies out that year. And before this, he was just a little known sketch comedy star, and not even the main star of the second, most watched sketch comedy. So it wasn't even SNL,
In living
which is
color.
In Living. I loved it in Living Color. Don't get me wrong, I loved it in
Yeah.
Living Color. The Fly Girls, everything. I was a big fan. Um, but all that to say, Jim Carrey was not a star. And then after this movie, after this year, after 1994, he became the biggest movie star in Hollywood, commanding the biggest salaries. And it's all because of his success of these three movies. So the first one up was Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, directed by Tom Shattuck, written by Shattuck, Jack Bernstein, and Carrey himself. I think most of that credit for the writing for Carrey was just because, of course, as he does, he ad libbed half the damn movie.
Yeah.
So they're like, all right, fuck, we got to give him a writing credit. So it obviously starred him, Courtney Cox. I will say this was Courtney Cox, and Sean Young, as well as Tone Loc.
Yeah.
Funky Cold Medina. There we go. There's an
Yeah.
early '90s thing for you. So this was released in February 4th. So just to point out that Friends didn't start airing until later that year. So this was before Courtney Cox became a massive star with Friends. I mean, she was somewhat known. She had been in a few things, but she wasn't a star. And this movie grossed 107 million on a $15 million budget. So huge success for what they put into it. Totally unexpected. And really watching this movie again, only successful because of Jim Carrey.
Mm.
It is a stupid fucking movie. I don't know how they even got this greenlit to make it because it's ridiculous. But I couldn't help myself, even despite some of the stuff that doesn't age well, including the ending of the movie with a little bit of transphobia. Well, a little bit, a lot.
Little bit.
Yeah, a lot, I should say.
Yeah,
Um,
when you burn your entire wardrobe. Like
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, a lot of transphobia, which is not good. The end of the movie. Um, Still, that said, watching again, there were so many parts during the first half of this movie when I found myself laughing to myself, and I'm like, why am I laughing? This is so stupid. But it's just because Jim Carrey is so good at what he
Mm.
does. And there is nobody else, I don't think, at that time who could possibly have done this movie.
Yeah, yeah, I saw this movie for the first time and I was like, definitely before 10, but it was after it already had come out because I was on my uncle's fishing boat in Cabo and I wasn't interested in seafaring. So just when they had a little VCR of the TV, and my sisters and I just watched Ace Ventura down there. So that's I don't know. It's another like core memory that just pops up whenever I see it. But yeah, anyway, yeah, just remember laughing my ass off then, and yeah, a lot of it doesn't age well at all,
No,
and
no.
Jim Carrey's been doing the same shtick for 30 years now, so a lot of it seems tired in retrospect. But
Mm.
if you kind of put the blinders on and see it for what it was, yeah, it was just the showcase for his talent.
Yeah, yeah. Put yourself in the position of somebody in February of 1994. Nobody had seen a comedian like this
Mm-mm.
before, really. So the next movie he did, Zach.
Yeah, then we have The Mask, and my my brain chronology was all messed up because I would have thought Ace Ventura would have come last in this year because it was like his vehicle, but no, it wasn't. And so, yeah, The Mask came out in July of this year, and it's ostensibly a superhero comedy film,
Hmm.
but it's really just another vehicle for Jim Carrey to go full bore into his Jim Carreyness and become a human cartoon, which is what he always does best.
Yeah.
And to be perfectly frank, I always prefer Jim Carrey when he does his dramatic roles. I loved him in Eternal Sunshine and
Yes.
The Majestic and things like that. But
Truman
that's beside
Show.
the point. Yep, we're here
Yeah.
to talk about
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
amazing year in 1994.
Yeah. I'm with you. Yeah.
So also notable for being the breakout role for Cameron Diaz, who parlayed that part into becoming one of the it girls of the 90s. And got talk about Jennifer Aniston at the top of the show, but she was hot, hot, hot. Yeah, she was amazing in that. It
Yeah.
grossed 350 mil on a $20 million budget, so you can see why his demand just completely went up. And uh, I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe he by the next year his price tag was about $20 million a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
And in the mid 90s, that's just stratospheric, dude.
Incredible. And studios were leaping at the chance to give it to
Absolutely.
him as well.
And so not much of a plot here,
No.
but it's more a series of skits loosely tied together by a magic mask that releases the wearer's inner id.
Yeah, a few
And
random dancing numbers. Like, yeah.
apparently, it was responsible for a big spike in the popularity of swing music in the early mid or to mid 90s, though. So I guess
Sure.
album sales went up there because there was no Spotify streaming or anything. So okay, good for the guys that were still alive from the 40s making making some extra bank off the swing music. And then of course the trifecta.
Yeah, so then he capped the year with Dumb and Dumber. So this was released on December 16th of that year. So at the very end of the movie. Sorry, very end of the year. It was directed by Peter and Bobby Farrelly. So, and this was actually the first movie of the Farrelly brothers. So it again, is a familiar theme. Not only did it launch Jim Carrey to superstardom, but it launched a lot of these other people to superstardom as well. It was written by them and Bennett Yellen. It starred Jim Carrey, Jeff Daniels, who we mentioned much earlier, in a totally different kind of role than what he played in Speed.
Good range, good range.
Yeah, and Lauren Holly. And this one again grossed 247 million on a 17 million dollar budget. So just absolutely incredible returns. So you can see why any production company, any studio is just jumping at the chance to work with Jim Carrey after this. He was box office gold.
Hmm.
And this one is one that sort of much more than the others. I think it stands the test of time. It's there are obviously some jokes here and there that don't land today, but for the most part, it's still kind of funny. There are still some very funny moments. Even 2025, it's very memeable in terms
Yeah.
of some of this stuff. So you're saying that there's a chance, that kind of thing. Um, that's the kind of thing that has just made its way into the general public consciousness. And so again, yeah, 1994, definitely Jim Carrey's year.
Yeah, wild. Especially with all these superstars that we've already discussed. But yeah, undisputably Jim Carrey's year.
Mhm.
But that's not all. We didn't highlight this just for 6 movies and Jim Carrey, and we're just gonna just do point by point here, maybe a little like one back and forth, just because we are going long at this point. But we also had Interview with the Vampire, uh, one of Brad Pitt's breakout movies. Tom Cruise is obviously the big movie star of the movie, but it had Antonio Banderas and Christian Slater, very young Kirsten Dunst,
Mhm.
and based on the Anne Rice series of novels that were absolutely huge. My mom was a massive Anne Rice fan, so they were always on the bookshelf. And one of the better vampire movies for my money.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And then also the same year, though, was Legends of the Fall, which also starred Brad Pitt as well as Anthony Hopkins. And so this was really the year again that launched I mean, so many stars were kind of launched this year that basically dominated Hollywood for the next 20 years. Well, and still going for Brad Pitt because he's going to
Mm.
be in F1, which is almost certainly going to be one of the biggest movies of this summer. But he had been in Thelma and Louise, obviously, before this, and that was kind of his a bit of a breakout for him, but he still wasn't a star. But then with Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall, man, he became the hottest thing.
Oh yeah.
And yeah,
And then we have the professional, aka Leon the professional, aka just Leon. Yeah, I've never known how to really stylize this movie because it
yeah.
has been released under three different titles, but for let's just go with the professional. Yeah, so it's a French hitman movie, and it's a Luc Besson joint. It was the very first film. No, was it? Yeah, one of the, if not the first, it was the breakout for a very young Natalie Portman.
Her very first film. Yeah.
Yeah, and great movie. Again, didn't see this until years after it came out. I believe I saw this in film school when I was in the New York campus. Yeah, yeah, because they had a screening room and yeah, we watched that. But yeah, great film, top to bottom.
Yeah, this is another film also that's kind of made by its villain. Gary Oldman just goes full fucking lunatic in this movie, and it's fantastic. Then also in 1994, Clerks, which was the first film of Kevin Smith. In our movies about Christianity, we talked about
Dogma.
Dogma, and this, and Kevin Smith has never been a massive box office success, but he was definitely a big part of the culture around movies for about 20 years, and this was his very first ever film.
Yeah, another one, another filmmaker that Weinstein took under his arm. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's impossible to just erase Weinstein from film history because he was just so instrumental in all these guys coming up in the 90s, but also has to be said that he's a piece of shit.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and then next up, yeah, oh yeah, Clerks. Yeah, very innovative, very very student filmy, but in a
Hmm.
way where it's still accessible
Yep.
because you just have guys in a convenience store talking about Star Wars and shit like that for like essentially 2 hours. uh, so next up we have Natural Born Killers, Oliver Stone joint starring Woody Harrelson, Juliette Lewis, Robert Downey Jr., Tommy Lee Jones, and Tom Sizemore, and follows two mass murderers. And Quentin Tarantino had a lot to do with writing this script, but Oliver Stone wound up changing it so much that Tarantino completely disowned it. So, and they've never really reconciled. And I've always been much more of a Tarantino fan than a Oliver Stone fan, even though they kind of intersect at some different points. But anyway, yeah, very successful movie, $110 million gross over $34 million budget. So not nearly as successful as some of the other ones we've talked about, but still a decent success.
Yeah, you can definitely see Tarantino's fingerprints all over the script, even if Oliver Stone changed it a lot. The bones are still there, and yeah, it's basically a Bonnie and Clyde for the '90s, and and kind of still resonates today. I mean, Mickey and Mallory, that's them as those kind of characters are probably what Bonnie and Clyde were for people for what 30 years. And I think we haven't really had another pairing like that that's kind of overtaken them in terms of cultural in importance these days.
Yeah, there was kind of a homage with the Queen and Slim a couple years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and I really like that movie, but
Yeah,
it just didn't catch on
yeah,
all that
exactly.
much with the general public. And next up, another movie, just incredible cultural relevance, even if box office wasn't huge, and that's The Crow. So this, sadly, was the movie where Brandon Lee, Bruce Lee's son, was killed during filming, reminiscent of a movie that's about to be released now, Rust. And just more than anything else, it's the look of The Crow, the image, the style of this film, which is carried on long after anybody remembers what the fuck the movie was actually about. But all that kind of stuff, I think, still resonates to this day.
Sure, and for wrestling fans of a certain age,
Yeah,
Sting made his most
entire
iconic.
image about this.
Yeah, so and he was my favorite guy in the mid '90s to early 2000s. Uh, yeah, so yeah, I've actually never seen The Crow front to back. Again, so but it always just kind of carries a ominous connotation because of
Yeah.
the incident with Brandon Lee. But next up, we have Four Weddings and a Funeral. It's a Mike Newell film, obviously '94 British romantic comedy, and it was really the breakout for Hugh Grant, but it also had Andy McDowell and Kristen Scott Thomas. And I have never seen this film.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have seen this film, and but not in a long, long time. Like
But
it's probably been 2 decades since I've seen this.
it did make $218 million on a $3 million budget,
It
which
was a
is
huge hit. It was a
yeah,
huge hit. And as you said, this is again, so many stars' careers were launched in, well, not necessarily launched. A few like Hugh Grant had been around for a while, but this is the movie that really made him a
sure.
big deal. And then the final movie we just want to highlight. Not a great movie necessarily, but Stargate came out, the original Stargate in 1994. And we just thought we'd mention it just because, it spawned a bunch of sequels and a TV series. So it's basically become a franchise, which is kind of crazy, considering that the movie Stargate wasn't necessarily that interesting of a movie back in 1994. But obviously, again, resonates.
Yeah, another one I've never seen. I don't think I've seen a single scene of that one. I've seen parts of Four Weddings and a Funeral. I don't think I've seen. I don't know anything about Stargate, so I won't even pretend to be knowledgeable or comment on it. But yeah, that's the year 1994 in a nutshell. And boy, what a year, both in news and film. So next up, we're going to be talking about vacation movies. A lot of if any of you are still in college or high school, the year's about to end, semester's about to end, so about to be launched into 3 months of fun, hopefully, and doing as little as possible.
Yeah, maybe some crappy summer jobs, but yeah, hopefully people will be enjoying themselves. And we're gonna take a look at a bunch of movies. Yeah, kind of vacation, summer vacation type movies. And across all different kinds of styles, from comedies to horrors to all different sorts of things. So that should be an
Yeah,
interesting,
and
eh,
this
interesting look
won't
at some
be
movies.
yeah, this won't be just a list of all the National Lampoon's vacation movies. Although I have a feeling the original one will appear somewhere on our list,
I think the
but
original one has to make the list. Yeah. We
but
haven't come
yeah,
up with our list yet.
it's not going to be quote unquote vacation movies, as in like Christmas Vacation, European
No, that would be
Vacation,
awful,
yeah,
actually.
Vegas Vacation, blah 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 blah.
Even though some of them are kind of funny.
All right, so yep, that's it from us on this evening. We hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed our time traveling back into 1994, and we will see you next week on the Unsolicited Film Reviews podcast. I am Zach Miller. He is Martin Cooke. Like, subscribe, comment. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.